Hey everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today, I am Pat Reinhart, VP of Digital Strategies here, with Ric Rodriguez, of Yext. And today we're going to be talking about, COVID-19, and how the pandemic is changing online consumer behavior, what we're seeing in the United States, what we're seeing in the United Kingdom. Just as a quick introduction to myself, as I said, I am the VP of Digital Strategies at Conductor. I work with, all of our customers to, just to keep them in the loop about what's going on with the industry and also just help them grow their search presence. Ric, would love to give you the stage to give a quick introduction.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's great to be here doing this webinar with the awesome team at Conductor. So yeah, my name is Ric Rodriguez. I'm the SEO Consultant at Yext, and my role is to bring search thinking to everything we do at Yext across Europe.
Very good. And we are going to jump right in. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a lot of data that Ric and I pulled together based on studies that we've done, collectively at Conductor and at Yext. And we're just going to have a discussion about what we've been seeing. Ric and I are in the weeds of it, every day with customers, with clients, with folks, with industry folks. And we're just here to give our opinion and our viewpoint of what we've seen with all the data that we have access to. So moving along, what we're going to start with is, COVID's impact on overall marketing budget. Conductor ran a study, and where we asked a ton of hundreds of top level marketers, basically what what is happening with their marketing budgets overall, right? And the first question that we asked them is, what is your greatest concern, surrounding the impact of COVID-19 on your marketing performance? And as you can see here, we have a mixed bag, right? 20% said channels that we heavily depend on are unavailable to us, like events, direct mail, that's a big part of a lot of companies', marketing efforts. 13%, we have no major concerns regarding our marketing performance, which is awesome. 11% said they're going to have a reduction in team size. Unfortunately, of course, we've seen that all across the world. About 11% said that that's how it's impacting them. And, reduction in marketing budgets, about 35%, just overall marketing budgets. And then 4% saying, staying up to date with SERP results, like Google My Business. And those are, people who are focused on more local business. And then 17% fell into another category where they didn't have a specific thing there. So interesting take on that. And the next question, given the developing situation with COVID-19, what do you anticipate will happen with your marketing budget? And you can see here that, only about 2% said it would increase greatly, which is interesting. 6.9% said it would increase slightly. But of course, most of it's on the other end. 26.8%, said that it would stay the same. A whopping 44.5% said it would decrease slightly. And then, a sizable, 20-ish%, said it would decrease greatly. So, as you can see, a lot of people, even at this stage of the pandemic, which, depending on where you are in the world, are in different areas, are seeing and feeling, different things. The next question that we asked was, given the developing situation with COVID-19, do you anticipate your marketing goals will change? So 9% said it would increase greatly, 27% said it would increase slightly, 32% said it would stay the same, 26% said it would decrease slightly, and 6% said it would decrease greatly. Again, as you can see here, it's interesting to see that, the marketing goals, the largest set saying that they would stay the same or increase slightly. So, companies very bullish on those, but also, a lot of folks understanding that, they probably will have to change their marketing goals, moving forward, or continue as the pandemic continues to roll out and continues to pan out. And then a couple more slides before we discuss, will the coronavirus, situation make your company's ability to achieve your annual marketing goals easier or more difficult? This one is really interesting because, 39% said slightly more difficult, 47% said more difficult, which is interesting. But then, 2% said easier, 5% said slightly easier, and 7% said no impact. That's an interesting stat to me, just that some folks believe that they'll have, that some folks haven't seen any impact, but it's really, it's really interesting, of course, that most folks see that it's going to be harder for them to reach their goals. And one final, metric before we get into a little bit of discussion, Tracking the impact of COVID-19 on teams across industries, 35% of respondents say a reduction in marketing budget is their greatest concern surrounding the impact of COVID-19. 58% say if faced with a global recession, because of this, they will have to lower their budget. 47% of respondents say that the coronavirus situation will make their company's ability to achieve their annual marketing goals more difficult. I think that's actually low, but it's interesting. And then, 63%, which of course is something that we are going to talk about. 63% of respondents say SEO will be more important during this time. So I want to pause there, and Rick, would love to get your thoughts on the data presented, but also on what your thoughts are on marketing budgets and what you've seen just in general. People saying it's more difficult, it's easier. Clearly, we're saying we're seeing a little bit of a mixed bag, leaning towards more difficult, which makes sense. But what are you seeing and hearing in the industry?
Yeah, so this is a great topic. I think it's really interesting because I've seen when the virus hit, the first thing you saw a lot of articles coming out was saying, keep your marketing budgets going. There's a lot of press around keeping marketing budgets, and the last time things happened in the world, things like recessions and that kind of thing, the brands that continued to advertise were the ones that stayed strong throughout and then beyond. That being said, we are seeing generally that there has been a decline, an expected decline in marketing budgets as COVID started to take over, particularly in the UK. And that's most likely, at least in my view, because people obviously want to reserve costs, and there's no point marketing and spending. If you're a brand that has a physical location and people can't go to that physical location anymore, there is no point trying to advertise to push that person to that location. Or if you're an e-commerce business, but for whatever reason you are unable to support those customers, or for whatever reason you can't, that people are not in the mindset to go and buy products. So great example, the travel industry we know has seen some challenges. If you're not able to actively immediately get people to buy last-minute holidays because they physically can't get on a plane and go, then you will pull back on that spend. So I definitely align to the point of there's definitely been some changes. I've personally seen, and that we've sort of widely speaking to friends and colleagues in the industry have seen from a marketing budget standpoint. But I actually think it's really interesting that the data says that there's been a decline in whether people think it'll be easier or not to hit their budgets, because actually, hit their targets or hit their goals. And overwhelmingly, people think it's going to be more difficult, because there are some businesses for sure that have seen fantastic trading through this period. Now, that in and of itself has come with challenges, like how do we deal with the increased demand? How do we manage and make sure that we provide a safe environment? But we still can't walk away from the fact that some businesses have been seen over and above demand than they would typically see. But yet the picture here is that it's overwhelmingly a negative thing, and that most people feel differently. So I do think that's a very interesting stat, as you highlighted. So yeah, summarize. Definitely seeing a decrease in budgets. I think from what I've seen, whether people are expecting to hit their targets or goals and achieve what they want to achieve are very different. And actually, something we will talk about, and something you sort of hinted on in terms of are they, things sort of what are their greatest concern with people going on furlough. That's something that we've particularly seen in the UK. Actually, it's less that the goals are harder to hit, but more that the team isn't necessarily in place to make the changes they need to achieve them.
Yeah, and we're seeing the same thing here in the U.S. Is the furloughs are hitting a lot of folks hard, of course, and to your point, the budgets might be there and they might be, but there's no one to fulfill on, which is why when people are saying that SEO, like you said, like this study, like 63% of people saying that SEO is more important. What we've seen in a lot of companies that the SEO teams or the folks who handle SEO, even if SEO isn't in their title, are typically being put on furlough for 2, 3, 4 months. So when we're expecting a delay in that, like as those folks come back, hopefully, like those campaigns will start to pick up again. But I mean, one question before we move on to that I'd like to ask you is, do you feel that companies are going to take stock of this? And like the data does say so, but do you believe that after all this is over, hopefully soon, that companies will start to take stock that SEO is very important, and we will see that rise, and we will see that kind of boon of interest that that a lot of people are expecting?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting time, and like you, I do hope that the situation is over soon, so that we can get back to some sense of normality, whatever that ends up being. I do think that what this has highlighted is the role that SEO plays, search marketing plays, in more than just performance marketing. So when we think of SEO, often we talk about it in a performance context. It's about driving traffic to site and driving sales as a result of that traffic. And what we're seeing is that as brands start to pull back on their advertising spends, and actually consumers are changing from being keen to receive messages and being proactive in getting information, that the role of search has somewhat flipped from being just performance marketing to being a brand marketing, information marketing tool, which is typically the role of paid advertising. I think that will act as a bit of a catalyst for change. One of the main reasons in my mind that we don't see SEO perhaps in sort of large media laydowns, and why it's not considered as sort of the same as perhaps TV once was, or broadcast once was, or PR is in certain circles, is because it doesn't have the senior stakeholder level support or understanding that of how it fits into the kind of wider business goals, and particularly the brand side of things. And I think what COVID has done is highlighted that actually it does play a huge role in brand as much as it does in performance marketing. And actually, that when you sort of compare things on, looking at things sort of in terms of sort of the econometric models that these businesses have, that actually the base customers are reliant on SEO more than most companies would have thought to be the case.
Yeah, no, great insight and great thoughts, and and agree. I think it's I think it's going to be it'll be an interesting time to see where the industry goes. I mean, people are going to go back to paid search, which is fine. People are going to they're going to put their budgets back. I just wonder if they are going to reserve that snippet of that snippet for SEO that maybe they were thinking of or on the fence of or weren't even thinking of in the first place. But definitely interesting insights. Yeah. And so let's talk about, COVID impact on SEO in general. So moving on, perfect segue. So we asked, same group of folks, will SEO be more or less important during this time? Really interesting findings here. 20% said no, it will remain the same. I will be interested to see if that is actually true. But again, 20% when we asked the last round of questions, which was a few weeks ago, 3%, it will decrease slightly. 2%, it will decrease greatly. So that's, I think that's actually a very positive sign for the SEO, component of the conversation, is that, no one is necessarily thinking of it decreasing. 34% said it will increase slightly, and 29% said it would increase steeply. And 12% said, I don't know. But when you look at this chart, clearly, the thought is that there will be an increased, interest in SEO. And, when you talk about, global recession impact on your marketing strategy, the one that I want to focus here is that 31%, said that we will specifically invest more, invest in more lower cost channels like SEO. I think that's actually just super interesting that, people who probably haven't been thinking about SEO, or again, it's still one of those black boxes, people are burning incense in the middle of the woods type thing, and they don't really understand it. What is this? All I hear is that it takes a long time, that, it takes forever, and that, people are just, it's full of, very tedious acts and things of that nature. While all true, it's still interesting to see that 31% of those folks believe that they will be investing more. So I think that everyone in SEO has a really interesting path ahead of them after this is all done. And just one last one before we talk again. Speaking of paid media, so again, are you shifting budget away from cost-heavy channels in paid media to lower-cost channels with earned media? And this one was interesting. Most people said they didn't know, and I think that if and when we do this again in a month or so, it's still going to be, I think people are still kind of up in the air, about what they're going to be doing. But, 6% about said we will decrease our paid media investment, but we will not increase our investment in earned media. So just decreasing paid spend. It will increase steeply, 2% said. That's probably for folks to kind of make up for lost time. It will increase slightly. It will decrease steeply, 7% and 8% respectively. 17% said it will decrease slightly, and 18% said no, our investment in paid media will remain the same. So I think this piece of data, and Rick, tell me your thoughts on it. Mainly shows that people still don't know what they're going to do. I think they're still waiting to see where everything shakes out. We're certainly not at the end of this thing. Things are opening up, and that's amazing, of course, but we still want to remain safe. But a lot of people here, what this tells me is that most people, are expecting A, to go back to business as usual, or B, still really just don't know what they're going to do about their paid budgets. Are they going to remain as high as they are? Is the investment still worth it? And things of that nature. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting around. So let's go back to the first point. Will SEO be more or less important during this time? I dare say that this is the graph is sort of the graphical equivalent of the SEO phrase. It depends, right? I think people are still trying to work out what's going on. I personally think that during this time, and in fact in the immediate time straight after we sort of get back to normality and we realize the financial impact that COVID-19 has had on the world, I think SEO is going to become more important because it's a cost-effective channel. But if we then go to the point around marketing and recessions and what that will do for marketing strategy, overwhelmingly people, as you say, said they'll lower their budget. It's actually a topic that we discussed at another conference that I did. Actually, what we think will happen and what I believe will happen is, yes, people will lower their budgets from their advertising side, but not necessarily on their SEO side. But what it will mean is that the SEO teams will be held more accountable in terms of, well, you previously said that you improved your visibility by this. What has that actually done for the business? And if you're working with teams or agencies that are not supporting you in the way they should, that's going to become clearer, and there is going to be heavier scrutiny on the time. So it's not so much the budgets will decrease, it's just that they will be laser focused on high impact activities, which you'd argue is the way that most SEO should be anyway, but for whatever reason, there's tons of things that go into SEO. So it'd be interesting to see how the way and the sort of breakdown of what a day-to-day looks like in SEO is post sort of if this recession hits. And then to your sort of the final point around shifting budget away, which is where I think this is sort of all leading to. I think the idea of it, I don't know, is great, because right now people don't know. We didn't know this virus was going to happen, so we've had to very quickly work out what we were going to do to keep business continuity and ultimately survive. But at the same time, the world post-COVID is going to look very different. There's going to be, what was once a nice to have, perhaps e-commerce for certain businesses will have become an expectation, but people's belief around things like delivery times might be very different, where before they're expecting 1 day delivery, they might be happy to wait 5 or 6 days in the future. People may not want to go out as much as they did before, and that's going to change the landscape. So I don't think we know what the channel mix and split will look like. I don't think any business can tell you that right now. But as far as paid media is concerned, I can't see, unless there's some sort of financial impetus as to why people would move their money away or reduce their spend, i.e. to save budget. I don't see why people would reduce in paid media, because it's very trackable. There's a direct response element to a lot of it, and that's not going to go away just because COVID happened. But I do think there's perhaps still a mindset of, well, SEO is free, and therefore it's not something we really invest in per se. It's just something we have the teams there to do it for us. And that was kind of a mindset pre-COVID that I think is still going to be in place post-COVID. It's just the teams that are in place are going to be considered more important and given access to different other teams more freely than they might have been before.
Yeah, no, and that's an interesting way to think about it. I know we're going to talk about what we see in the future at, towards the end, but, I think, teams being more, held more accountable when maybe in a lot of organizations they weren't, is an interesting point. We'll definitely revisit later, but I think that's an interesting way to think about that. A lot of companies that maybe necessarily didn't pay attention to the group too much, or just like, oh yeah, we have someone on that, are now going to be like, hey, are we hitting goals? Are we impacting our bottom line, or are we just keeping the website going? So that's an interesting, that's definitely an interesting thought as well. Anyway, so the next one, industry specific findings. Rick, I know you put together some slides here. So we'll just get into these, and I'll let you take over the reins. Sound good?
Would you mind driving for me? But yes, that would be. I'm absolutely happy to talk through these.
Absolutely.
So if we could have a look at the first slide, which should be the global view of sort of what's going on with COVID and sort of how we've seen the demand in industries change. And I wanted to present this specific data. So it's from Yext's COVID search data hub, which is publicly available. There's a link there if anyone wants to go and access it, and you can see how the last week performed against the previous year. And I think this is important because we often look at the immediate impact of COVID, but actually what's happened over the 3, 4, 5 months of however long it's been for your country, there has been a very significant change. And so what we've got here is the last completed week's data versus the previous year. And there's definitely some changes. And this is where I think it's really interesting. So for me, there's a couple of highlights. Generally, and I would say that on the whole, this data skews more towards what we see in the US, but in a moment we'll go through the UK and US in a bit more detail. But generally what we're seeing is retail is continuing to grow, which actually is one of the interesting differences between the UK and the US, where that's not so much the case. Telecommunications, I'll come on to why that is in a moment, but that's an interesting increase. Travel and hospitality are still seeing the same levels of decline as they once had right at the start, so people haven't really decided to go back to those businesses yet. And things like recreation, hotels and bars, restaurants, they're not really coming back at this stage either globally, but that doesn't mean that they won't do it in the future. I think that's important to say. If we move to the next slide, this should focus on the UK, and there are some interesting situations. So in the UK, for those of you that don't know, our lockdown is very different to perhaps other parts of the world in that there's certain things we can and can't do. And when this was, these aren't always the things you might expect. So this week here, which was the last week so the first week in June, there was a lot of information coming out around that shops might start to open the following week. And in fact, we had a huge number of non-essential retailers that were allowed to open as of this Monday, which is Monday the 15th, I want to say. So this is sort of the most relevant data at this point. We obviously still can't go to bars, restaurants, and that kind of thing, and even things like food services businesses are still not that widely open. But we have seen things like car showrooms open again, and banks have had wider expanded opening hours, and that's really being reflected in the data here. As you can see, automotive is up by 8%, financial services are starting to go up, and retail has gone up significantly as well. And actually, you'll see this is a consistent thing across all the data presenting, but telecommunications is seeing a huge year-on-year increase. Now, telecommunications is an interesting one because that is split into two things. That's split into what we call cell phones, i.e. consumer-facing services, and business-facing services. And actually, unsurprisingly, the business communication services are what are driving that massive increase, both in the UK, in the US, and globally. In the UK alone, we've seen 177% increase in search volume for related terms versus the previous versus the previous year for the same week. Actually, demand for cell phones has declined, so that's actually dropped by 35% in the UK. So it is being driven by the public trying to get access to things like Zoom and those types of systems to keep in touch with family, which is just quite interesting. One very minor point, but is also again worth noting, is that although search volume has gone up for business communication services and traffic to sort of phone calls and that kind of thing, foot traffic to businesses where these get sold is still down. So this is definitely an online e-commerce type thing as opposed to one that people are going in stores again. And if we move to the final slide, which I'm hoping is the US, there's definitely some interesting stats and information here as well. Automotive in the US has massively increased, which is really interesting. And I'll give you guys a little bit of a stat as to what's driving that. Generally, we've seen things like car parts and car sales. They're around a 25 to 40% increase in search volume. But the two areas we're seeing the massive, sort of the largest amount of growth, which perhaps is driving this 20.93%, is search volume for motorcycles has increased to 92%, and boats, the searches for people looking for boat-related terms has massively increased, nearly 120% year on year, which is absolutely massive, right? Which is, I mean, lots of people are looking into boats right now. if we look into retail, the US has been focused a bit more in retail. There's definitely some bigger changes there, and I know that there's been sort of more around how the US is opening. But what I think is really interesting as part of this as well is, and maybe this is, I don't know how controversial or not this is to say, but actually a large percentage of this is being driven by guns and ammo sales and search volume for that. We've seen a 161% increase in businesses that sell guns and ammunition, and the same for sporting goods as well, significant increases there, as well as homeware and all the things you expect people to want to do if they're in lockdown, so pharmacies, homeware, pet stores, etc. But the largest category growth is actually the gun market. So that's just something interesting to know as part of this as well. So yeah, some very interesting changes going on in the world. A lot of differences in search volume. Generally speaking, travel and hospitality is sort of down in terms of search volume and traffic. Well, that's expected given that people can't necessarily fly right now. Recreation businesses gyms and the like haven't come back, food services, but telecommunication is seeing growth, retail is seeing growth, and automotive as well. So if you're a company that sells boats, you're in a great place right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, that kind of leads into, the next part of the discussion is really just, like the US versus UK and what we're both seeing, right? So you hit the nail on the head with a lot of the same thing. Retail, like the United States is starting to open up. There are many states that are, well into the different phases here. I personally reside in New York, not in the city. I'm in Long Island. We are currently we're entering phase 3. Which means, basically like summer camps are opening and things of that nature. Last week, restaurants were able to open, and, we're seeing retail stores starting to open too, especially this week. A lot of folks, I got a lot of, reopening emails. So a lot of stores with a ton of signage out there where, everyone, as the weather gets nicer, it's going to be harder to keep people inside. And, the data that we're seeing here is that people are searching, in retail more. People are looking for, things such as, like inflatable pools, bathing suits, things like regular summer things, so it's almost, it's interesting to see that people's behavior is very similar to what they were searching for last year at this time, because it's just like, listen, we've been stuck inside for 100 days plus, things are starting to open up. And you're starting to see search behavior come back. And even from the hospitality side, a lot of the hotel chains that we work with are saying like, hey, listen, like we're starting to get people calling us again. We're starting to see this. I think the big area that we're still seeing a lot of drag in is, of course, airlines, where, I'm not sure, I'm not seeing a huge uptick in anyone searching for flights or anything we're seeing a little bit more positive movement, but I still think that's gonna linger on here in the States for a while.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see the same in the UK as well. So for those of you again that don't know, the government in the UK has introduced a quarantine. So if you arrive in the UK, you have to quarantine for 14 days, and that's had a profound impact on the airline industry. And I know there's been a lot of conversation around what that means. But on the flip side, a lot of airlines that weren't running flights at all, brands like EasyJet and Ryanair, have started to introduce flights again. So although I think there's been a step that I understand has been not that helpful to people in the airline industry, there are definitely signs of recovery and people wanting to start again. And there's a lot of flights within the UK that are now reinstated, and lots of people traveling within different parts. So London to Scotland is quite a popular, interesting route, and up north to Manchester, that's kind of the business, a lot of time focused around the business routes. And once that starts to open, I imagine we'll start to see more sort of consumer focused routes starting to open as well. But yeah, I think we're seeing the same trend here.
Yeah, it's interesting. And another thing that you mentioned was the automotive industry. And, one thing that I've seen from all this is, a lot of times when, people were talking about buying cars online was this weird thing because, you want to test drive it, you want to sit in it, it's a big purchase. But a lot of large retailers, like automotive retailers, have introduced an e-commerce function onto their site and actually started to promote it more and more. I've noticed that in the United States. I see a lot of commercials with that on, really promoting it, like, hey, you can buy your car online, we'll drive it to your house, we'll drive this. I've seen, you know, and you can see it in your data that, you know, interest in that has gone up, that people are like, oh, I can buy a car online because, you know, no one necessarily wants to go anywhere to have to buy anything anymore. But are you seeing anything similar in the UK? Like anything, like any businesses that are like, that were, you know, typically like, yeah, e-commerce, whatever. Like, has any been like, oh yeah, like we do this now, we've done this all along. Have you seen anything like that?
Well, it's really interesting because we've had an explosion of businesses that are e-com first, that are car companies selling used cars and sort of older cars. There's definitely been an expansion. So great business that's just started trading, a company called Kazoo, Cazoo. Great company, a great team there. Those guys are an e-com first business that will deliver the car to you, even though it's a used car. They'll pick it up, they'll deliver it to you, and you can, you know, and actually as a consumer, you don't have to go anywhere to get the vehicle, but you can still see all the information you need online, etc. And great thing with those guys is, and you see this across all the sort of providers, is that you can test drive it, and if you don't like it, they'll come and pick it up from you. Now, this was happening pre-COVID. I mean, this business has been around for, you know, a couple of months now, before, and particularly before this situation started. So I think generally there's been a business shift towards online in the automotive space anyway. But that being said, you're right. Like, there are definitely car companies focusing what their e-commerce presence is, sort of traditional manufacturers focusing on what that looks like. And I think we'll start to see more of the automotive industry open up as, say, the government has just allowed showrooms to open again. So that's a very large step in sort of our lockdown strategy.
Yeah. I mean, and that even comes back to, you know, like thinking about other businesses that went online, you know, during this whole thing. Another one was real estate here in the States. You know, you started to see a lot of real estate agents who took 30 days off, and they're like, hey, listen, I got to get back to work. And they started showing houses virtually. Like they would do they would like Zoom with someone and walk them through the house and be like, hey, listen, you know, here's this for people who still wanted to buy. And I've actually seen in the data that search demand has gone up for those types of, you know, for those types of queries as well, you know, like virtual tour, virtual home tour, Zoom home tour, and things of that nature. Anything that you've seen in the UK that's similar like that?
Well, to go back to real estate, we've definitely seen that. I think we're in exactly the same situation where, I mean, there was a point where the lockdown hit very, very quickly, as in people saw it was coming, but we went from no lockdown to everything stopped very, very quickly. And so actually, even within the first week, there had to be updates to our strategy around actually people that were in the process of moving house could continue to do that. So removal companies were one of the first businesses that were allowed to go back to work because people were literally in the process of completing and of moving and just couldn't stop. So real estate from a removal and sort of the latter stages component, that's always been a part of. So that as far as I'm aware hasn't changed, but I'm sure the data says differently. But on a sort of wider real estate system, and I remember real estate includes things like commercial real estate and business real estate. And firstly, we know that a lot of businesses have now moved to work from home. We're seeing that from huge tech companies all the way through to small independents. That's going to have an impact on the future of that industry, I personally believe. But we are seeing that as a trend, i.e. more businesses are flexing around supporting things like co-working and flexible working in ways they weren't before. So that's one thing to note. But actually, we are seeing businesses offer virtual housing tours, as you say, and having that whole process get carried out online. The thing is, I'm not sure, and again, I have no data on this, but I'm not sure just from having someone in my family that's going through the process of actually trying to navigate this, even though it is a halfway house, to use a terrible cliche in that instance, actually, even though it is a halfway house, I don't think people are converting at this stage. They're still doing the review, and they're still doing the look and research around where they want to go and what sort of property they want. But I still think there's an element of we want to be able to go to the property we're looking at to buy it, which was always an important part of the journey in the UK. Interestingly, though, that's one of the first sort of things they allowed people to do as lockdown started to lift in the UK. So I wouldn't be surprised if that as an industry starts picking up again very soon.
Yeah, no, interesting. And that actually takes us to, you know, kind of to the next point, right, is, you know, what does the future look like, you know, here? And I think that's a good place to start, is for, folks for search and things in general. Like, you say, like from a real estate standpoint, like things like co-working spaces, office spaces in general. I think, what I'm seeing a tremendous amount of increase in, remote work, obviously, remote work, permanently and things of that nature. I think one of the big things that this is going to change, from a search and just from a business standpoint is that I really don't think people are going to have to, or are going to be in the same office like 5 days a week. I think that that's gone. And I think that for us, that opens up a lot of opportunity to hire from anywhere. It's like, hey, if you live in Kansas City and you're the right person for the job, but our HQ is in New York, I'm not sure that matters anymore. So I think from a talent standpoint, which would be my first point, would be, I don't think it matters where people sit anymore, because we have all proven for the most part, that we can run businesses, like ours in digital. We can run the businesses from home if we have to. Like this is something that we've been talking about at Conductor quite a bit, is, hey, listen, in the future, we have to move to more of a remote first mindset to a degree, because people like working from home. I have a lot of folks in my team who like working from home, and I'm totally cool with that. When my second son was born, I started working from home once a week, and it broke. I have about an hour and 10-minute commute each way into Manhattan, and it made my weeks a little bit easier. But also, those were my probably highest productive days, because I'm there. I'm just there. I get at least 2.5 hours of my day back, from a commute standpoint. And you just start hammering home. And that's something that I think that we're all going to see, a little bit of a change in our industry, especially in digital, is that people are just going to be like, hey, listen, I don't see any reason why I have to come into the office anymore. And it's hard to say why they should, so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think particularly in search, we're starting to see. So it's really interesting. We had the whole world of in-housing maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where you saw even not just within search, but big media companies and big brands bringing their media teams into their own sort of ecosystem, rather than sort of having agencies as the sole managers of that spend. So we started to see that happen, and then there's this rise of SEO freelancers, which is great to see. More SEO people are going out on their own and supporting businesses in more flexible ways. I do think that what this COVID-19 situation will do, if we're sort of talking about the impact on the future, is produce a mindset where that kind of relationship, so the contractor, the freelance market, is far more not just accepted but attractive as you as a sort of a CDO or a digital director are starting to put your team together, because you might need an SEO person for, I don't know, specific tasks, but you don't want to necessarily hire a full-time employee for that. And so you've now got a group of people you can go to get that information. And interestingly, seeing not just businesses, not just freelancers pop up, but actually businesses that manage and support freelancers in getting work and driving leads to those freelancers from big brands as well, acting almost as like the middle layer. So that's really interesting. I also agree with you. I don't think the majority of businesses will go back to a strict work from the office policy, partly because now we've all now we've all been in a world where a lot of people have proven they can work effectively and efficiently from home. The overheads of running an office, a huge office where you have enough space for absolutely everyone, perhaps is not quite the overhead, it's not quite the justifiable cost that it once was. And particularly as we come out of COVID and there is perhaps the impact of a global recession, businesses will be looking to reduce costs where they can. And that's perhaps one where we'll see the whole work from home attitude and sort of flexibility with flexible working stick around. I think that's really cool. Because you're right, it means that the talent market gets massively unlocked, and people that felt like they could only work for certain businesses because they were in the area of that business suddenly can work for other businesses that they've always dreamed of, and that really does change the dynamic of the landscape, which I think is a welcome shake-up in my mind.
I agree, and I also think that just coming into that and playing off of that, like the universe of talent is getting bigger for everybody, and people being able to work for companies that they love but just don't live near. I think this also helps out the industry in general, right? Because looking at the data that we just went through, both you and I clearly there's going to be some level of increased interest in our industry. I at Conductor, I feel like the world started to turn back on about 3 weeks ago, where, phones started ringing again. I started getting a normal level of questions, and it wasn't just about, it wasn't just about COVID, just hey, this and that, general data questions and things. I was actually getting, questions about the industry again, and also how can this, I haven't really believed in this channel in a long, before. Can you help me believe, can you help me understand it? And I think that, and I'm getting those consistently again, but even and it feels like it's accelerating. I think that after this, taking into account, people are going to recognize that, SEO is a seed that you plant, right? And, that seed eventually turns into a tree. And on sunny days, that tree will keep you shaded and keep you cool. And it'll keep you cool through good times and through bad times as well. And the more trees that you plant, the more shade that you have and the more cover that you have as you go down this path. And as folks become more, I think this is one of those eye-opening moments, of course, outside of what's going on in the world. But really, just from speaking strictly from a digital standpoint, where people are man, we spend a lot of our budget on, on paid, on, direct mail, on email campaigns, and then, 40% of our revenue, of our digital revenue, comes from organic search, and we invest, $2,500 in it, to buy a series of tools, and we have this one person that spends a fourth of their time on it. I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes, is that we're going to start to see a lot more in-house SEO teams, start to pop up and say hey, listen, and I think we're going to be working with a lot of new people this year, over here in the States. But would love to hear your thoughts on that, Rick.
I think you're right. I think what's really interesting about SEO, and partly why I love it so much, is it's very, very broad, in as much as you've got those people that are digital PR experts and they still operate under the banner of SEO, all the way through to super techie people that are into coding and development, or information architects and people that are into ontologies and machine learning. All of those people can exist under the banner of search marketing. And so actually, to meet an SEO that says, I know it all, that's, even if someone is very experienced, no one ever really will ever know it all, because it keeps growing and so broad. But what this does mean is that businesses, at least in my mind, will start to put emphasis on the people rather than the budgets themselves, right? So it's not just a case of, well, I want to increase my SEO activity, so I'm going to throw another 10 grand a month at it. It's, well, actually, to increase my SEO, I need a specialist in machine learning. I need a specialist in coding, and perhaps if Python's an added bonus of that, brilliant. Or I need a digital PR specialist that can also speak to my existing PR people and talk to my content and branding people around what we want to do. And actually, I realize that those are individually specialist people that have skill sets and expertise behind them that I'm going to invest in. So you're right. I think not only will you see bigger teams, but you'll see or new teams, but actually very differently formed teams, rather than just sort of hire the one generic SEO person who essentially manages the agency relationships, which I think will be great for the industry, because it forces people to learn and become passionate about what they do, rather than just sort of manage an agency schedule, or as an agency kind of do what the client is telling you to do, which doesn't help anyone in a lot of times.
Yeah, no, and that's a fair point too. And I think you'll also start to see a lot more openness for, for collaboration between groups as well in these companies.
Yeah.
I think that, because I mean, listen, we've all been, we're all there. We've all been there. Anyone who's listening that, runs an SEO program, getting everyone on board is no small task. It's not an easy thing.
Absolutely.
You got to get content on, you got to get web on, you got to get IT, in some ways you got to get, sales aligned, like when we're building materials and things of that nature, so that you're getting the biggest bang for your buck in marketing. And I think at the end of the day, we're going to see a more willingness, across the industry, across the globe, of people to say, hey, listen, we got hit really bad, during this terrible time in human history. But, we want to try to shield ourselves a little bit from that, if God forbid it ever happens again, and hopefully it never does. But at the end of the day, I think you're going to see a lot of teams that start to collaborate better and they start working together. And I think I'm going to be talking to a lot more than SEO and content people. I think I'm going to be hearing from, more higher level marketing people, more more paid people, more writers, more freelancers and things of that nature, and a lot more web teams. One particular company that we work with and run a fairly large campaign with, after 3 years of working hand in hand with them, we find it took us almost 2.5 of those years to get on the phone with the tech team, the web team that actually implements things onto the website. We have a standing meeting with them every single week, and that has been one of the most fruitful relationships that we've had, because we can go in and we can explain why we want these things to happen, even if maybe they're not going to have an impact on, money-wise for the site. It's more that they'll have a performance enhancement, which will lead to more money. And but being able to explain that, where before that, very unwilling to get on the phone with us, very just like, hey, listen, just put a ticket in, we'll get to it when we can get to it. And we've gotten we've gotten 4 times as much done from that one meeting, and that's just making that connection. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, I think I've been saying this for a long time. I think collaboration in search is not just needed. I think it's absolutely essential and critical to success. One thing is what I'm seeing, and again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. But what I'm seeing is that search is diversifying, and a lot of what we do as search marketers is actually coordinating and bringing things together so that other people understand the value of what they're doing on our channel, and also helping them sort of navigate that part. So, give you an example: if a business is redesigning their product pages, there's going to be a creative team creating the copy for it. There's going to be an IT team creating the look and feel for it. And perhaps there's a merchandising team that are going to work out the journey and how that all fits together. And we as SEOs, we might not go in and deploy anything on that page, but we would need to influence all 3 of those people to make sure that when they do what they're doing it with 1, search in mind, and 2, to drive value for everyone's channel. And so when we do approach that, if there's stuff that, if we come in and say, here's 100 recommendations, guys, please get to them, it's going to be backlogged, it's going to be deferred until their next focus on it. But if we sit those 3 groups down and go, right, we think there's a project due, what are your plans for these product pages? And everyone starts to feed in and starts to collaborate. Suddenly that becomes a project that everyone can work on and dedicate resources, time, effort, budget, and also everyone wins from doing. So I think collaboration is intrinsic, but yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, absolutely. And, like I always say that, people believe in things when they feel ownership of it, right? Or some piece of ownership of it. And no one likes to be told what to do, or told, hey, this is happening, you're doing this. And even though sometimes that's necessary, people want to be a part of a solution and want to be a part of a project that impacts their day-to-day and ultimately impacts the business. And I think that your points kind of play into that, when you get that collaboration and people come in and they all start to contribute, and everyone's like, hey, listen, say the SEO person goes in and says, hey, listen, we need to get these 3 or 4 groups together. Here are the ways that we typically do it with companies of your size, a company in your vertical, a company with your challenges. What do you guys think we can do? And, and you have like you said, you have the stakeholders from those groups sitting there, all talking to one another, so that it's not a faceless email saying, hey, we're going to do this project. And then they're like, oh yeah, whatever. And then, you do it for a month and it fizzles out. It's everyone, regularly meeting, having those conversations, and everyone, most importantly, agreeing to what's happening, because I think that's a lot of, that's something that gets lost sometimes, is that, hey, listen, it's like, we're going to ask these folks to do some things. Do they agree to this, or are we telling them what to do? Because if we're telling them to do it, most likely it's not going to work, and, and like you said, if everyone works together, they all of a sudden, you're impacting the business as a whole, and you're impacting that bottom line as a whole. You all feel ownership of it. And when they feel ownership of it and they feel ownership of the process, everybody wins. And from a search standpoint, I think that's one of the things that we're going to have a larger opportunity to kind of, plug ourselves into. Whereas I think some of those groups do collaborate, from time to time, and well within some organizations. But I think the search aspect of it, most people just default to paid search because, it's instant gratification and it's big numbers and things of that nature. But I think if you can get everyone to start with search in mind, but also educate them that we are not trying to change your jobs drastically. We're not trying to take away, like your day to day. Like we just want to plug ourselves in and help you. And search data can help everybody. It can help business development folks, it can help IT folks, it helps content folks, it can help everyone, inform everybody about what's going on. And I think once people see that, and once they experience that, oh, okay, this stuff, this isn't actually as hard as as I have heard, through articles and people's opinions. It's actually just like informing myself before I go and write a blog post. For as a very short example, it's really just, oh, I understand that we have to implement these canonical tags because we have these 50 different versions of this page, and Google doesn't know, which is which. And I think once people get into it, much like getting into SEO, once you kind of get bit by the bug, you're like, oh, okay, I understand this. And then you just start pulling the levers and you start learning more and more about it. And it doesn't seem so scary as a lot of people, seem to think SEO still is.
I couldn't agree more. I love the idea of delegating or creating this sense of shared ownership, because I think that's a really key point. We often, when we deliver a recommendation, it very much feels like we're saying you have to do this because this is what we need. And you know what? Perhaps we do need it because that's how we hit our goals. But if I take a load of IT requests to someone in IT and say, do this, they're going to have other priorities. The checkout functionality has probably just gone down. They're getting attacked by DDoSers constantly. It's so complicated. It's so what's the right word? So minor in their world of all the major issues that are going wrong, that actually me just coming in and bundling a load of work means it's probably going to get, let's say, backlogged, and it's probably not going to get done. That being said, if I know that those guys, by having a good relationship with them, by helping them, etc., have a big project focused on 3 things they care about in 6 weeks, I can say to those guys, look, no pressure. Here's some stuff I think you need to consider. Let's talk about it in 3 weeks so it's ready for when you do it in 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And again, and I think that's what we're going to be seeing moving into the future. A lot more of that, a lot more collaboration, a lot more openness to talk about SEO, and a lot more opportunity for folks to thrive in the industry and enter the industry, as well. So Rick, this is a great conversation. Anyone on the line, if anyone has any questions, we have about 3 or 4 minutes left, before the top of the hour, that we can answer some questions. We have a couple, that are coming in already. So we'll answer a couple of questions and then we'll sign off. Feel free to ask about anything. But the first one is comes back to the SEO being more important. How can I prove? The question is, how can I prove the importance of SEO to my upper management who, don't even open my emails? That's a good question.
Yeah, very good.
So for me, I mean, one of the things that I've always done, is, just showing them how it impacts the business as a whole, but also surprising them with something that they may not have known about the business. The best way that I've found is to show them what the competition is doing better than what you're doing. Managers, directors, executives hate being beaten by the competition. And one of the things that I try in true ways is, creating nice very simple, visualizations to say like, hey, listen, like, your organic market share, theirs is, 35% and ours is 18, and, people are like, well, why are they twice the size of us? What is happening? And then all of a sudden this huge conversation comes and all of a sudden you're in a boardroom talking to 15 executives about what you want to do. Yeah. So that's usually one way I go. Yeah. Rick, what about you?
Yeah, so I think there's a really interesting point around. So firstly, competition, competitive data, always very helpful in proving how you could be doing things better if those guys are succeeding. But one thing I've also been seeing is search has changed quite a lot in the last couple of years, and things that we used to consider as guarantees just because we would do so are no longer the case. Take brand, for example, right? Just because you're a brand doesn't mean that you will be returned as the answer to a customer's very specific question, right? If you are, I'm going to pick a random brand. I've got a can of Coca-Cola next to me. So let's say you're Coca-Cola and someone asks, is Coca-Cola healthy? If you don't have content on that, you don't get returned. But if that's a consumer that is literally ready to buy a Coca-Cola, I mean, perhaps bad example because I know Coca-Cola gets sold through supermarkets opposed to D2C, but you get the idea, right? That's a consumer that I am literally about to lose that has already decided to buy if I don't answer that question. Now, we used to think that was the case, and because we're the brand, even if we didn't have the direct answer, we might still be returned because we're Coca-Cola. But what we find now is that if search engines can find that information from somewhere else, they'll return that from somewhere else as long as they trust in it. So a great example to prove the value or importance of SEO back to your business is, hey, take a long tail query that the customer that your business might care about, is a definite person you're attracting is going to buy, and perhaps show them what that looks like to the business, what that looks like in terms of whether you're answering or not. And then if you can show them what a competitor's doing around that, that's another line of going into that. You're not there to prove that you've not done any work. You clearly have. It's more that this is why you need me, because I am the person that can help you solve this and connect the dots, so to speak.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and makes total sense. So thank you for your question. So again, those are the two ways that we would do it. And with that, we unfortunately are out of time. Everyone who has joined, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation for me. Rick, thank you for the data, for the insights, for lending your brain to us. It's been a tremendous conversation, and everyone, thank you so much for joining us here today, and looking forward to seeing you all at the next one.
Likewise, it's great talking to you, and thank you everyone for joining. If anyone has any questions that they want to ask us both, we're both on Twitter, and you can also ask, I'm sure, our respective company Twitter hashtags as well.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, everyone, and we'll see you next time.